Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from South Hadley, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Camus. He offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass. Today he'll be talking about the Nonotuck paper mill. So, where was the Nonotuck located?
Okay, the Nonotuck mill was located on the second level canal between the second level canal and the Connecticut River. And it was a mill that was made to manufacture paper, so it got a lot of strength. And the drop of water is probably about 20 feet to the back of the river. Okay, today we're going to talk about what production was like at the mill. And we'll learn about the history of the mill itself. And we're also going to talk about what this mill was associated with, because it was associated very strongly with another mill in Holyoke. Now, the location was prime because it was right in the middle of 7 in a row paper mills that were producing lots of paper for. They got the name Paper City for all these mills in a row. Only one of those 7s is still left, and that's because that one is one of the first. All the other have been taken down. That's very, very sad.
And so, what was the production like at this mill?
Okay, the production side of the mill was typical. You have to pause it. Alright, so we're talking about production at this mill, and keep in mind that the production, like most of the paper mills in Holyoke, is going to be very similar. There's only a couple that were off the beaten path that were quite different. So most of this mill was about 2 floors high. The front was used for the finished product of the paper. The back was used for the raw material. So the raw material was brought in the back railroad, and there you'd have the rag rooms, and then coming down you'd treat that paper. And so as a combination, as you went forwards in this mill, you would do certain jobs to get it ready. And the paper would be beaten in the next room, and then it'd be drained of its water, and so forth. Then it'd be treated to whatever it was going to be treated with. And the front would hold the storage, and make the lines, and make the cuts, it would do the calendar and the dimensioning. So this mill, sure, top down, but also back forwards for the finished product at the front. So it's similar to, I think the Crocker was like that, and other mills go all 4th floor down the 1st floor finished product. This one, as it came down, also went forwards with the finished product, and that's because it was a very big mill and get away with that.
And so quickly, before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there he has both videos of the various stops along each tour, and also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you're interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And they are perfect for fun and educational outdoor activities for the whole family or for your group parties, especially those special occasions and get-togethers. And they are also good just for getting outdoors for the day. So getting back to our interview, tell us of the history of the Nonotuck.
Okay, the Nonotuck mill was, of course, made during the time that Holyoke was getting really, really strong in paper. That was about 1880. Through the late 1870s, it was getting exceptionally strong. So this one came in about that time. And it included another mill in its repertoire that was right next to it. So we'll talk about that next, because that became very strongly associated. But it was a strong mill and stayed that way from 1880 into the 1960s. And along the way, it had become part of the American Writing Paper Company. And that was great because for a while it really helped all these paper mills get together and share resources and materials to try to get a better production going. But by the late 1960s, it all collapsed and nothing could be done again. All right, so
So which paper mill is it strongly associated with and why?
Okay, it's a strong association with the Mount Tom paper mill, and that's right next to it, and they were bonded together. The Mount Tom paper mill started off in the year 1880 also, and it was owned in the very beginning by William Sims and a partner, and he had moved off to Michigan and started up a paper mill there on a small canal. And at that point, the Nonotuck Paper Company took it over. So both of them started 1880, 1883, that Mount Tom sold, and Nonotuck, right nearby and bigger than the Mount Tom, took over that Mount Tom and renamed it from the Sims and Dudley into the Mount Tom Mill. So there was right near the beginning of these paper mills, there they were joined together and stayed that way for a very long time. And there was a very similar mill. It made mostly book paper, envelope paper. It had a different set of owners, but it after that it started its to be tied to the joint with the other one. And Mount Tom paper mill would end up being called the Nonotuck paper mill number one, and the regular Nonotuck would be called the Nonotuck paper mill number two. But together they joined the American Writing Paper Company. Together they lasted into the late 1960s, and so everything was great.
And so thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours, and we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And again, you can tune into a large selection of our other podcasts and much more at his website. Again, that's holyokecanaltour.org. And again, you can email him directly for private tours or to inquire about anything else at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And be sure to keep an eye out for his upcoming 2024 season tour and more as they become available. Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Camus. He offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass.
This paper mill in Holyoke was started very early on in 1880, and it was started by a couple of men whose full names are George Dudley and William Sims. And it's for that reason it was called the Sims and Dudley Paper Mill in the very beginning. So we're going to talk about today what was made at this Melton Paper Mill as specifics. We're also going to talk about what production was like inside the mill, and we're going to talk about William Sims because he has a very interesting life to him. Now, this mill is found on the second level canal in the very northern part, and it was surrounded by other paper mills, for instance, the Valley, the Nonotuck, the Mount Tom, the Albion, the Guild, the Crocker are all in the same area. And so I call this Paper Alley. There's so many paper companies right in the same place. All right, now, what happened when they started up in 1880, they had those two owners, but can you imagine by 1883, they had already sold it. And they moved both those people out to a place called Watervliet, Michigan, which had a very tiny canal. This place is in the deep southwestern corner of Michigan. And I don't know why they went out there, but sadly, William Sims was in the mill out in Michigan, and he fell from a scaffolding. And from that fall, he never really recovered. He would end up getting diseases because of his inactivity, including diabetes and so forth. Now, in 1883, when they moved, the whole paper mill, Mount Tom, it was called Sims and Dudley, but in 1883 it was taken over by Nonotuck Paper, and they renamed it the Mount Tom Mill. They also called it the Nonotuck Mill number one, and they built the Nonotuck Mill number two, but they would go back to call it the Mount Tom Mill. All right. Now, strangely enough, this mill was part of a presentation I gave in the year 2022 because I had a presentation called The House in Holyoke Through Time, and I chose as a house William Sims' house on Linden Street. So I know a lot about William Sims, and I'll talk about his life there.
And what was made at Nonotuck Paper Mill?
Okay, so they were a paper mill, but they specialized, of course, and since they're associated with Nonotuck, they would complement them very well. Now, the Sims and Dudley paper mill from 1880 and 1893, they made book paper, envelope paper, and flat paper, ruled line paper, and they made it in such a way that it was made with animal fat to glue the fibers together. When it became the Mount Tom Paper Company after 1893, they made white paper and tinted paper, slightly tinted, and they mostly sold it under the Crown tissue paper, which is very, very fine writing paper, the kind you would write letters to people. And back in 1890, writing letters was all you had to communicate with people. So this was very important.
And quickly before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there he has both videos of the various stops along each tour and also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you're interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And they're perfect for fun, educational, outdoor activities for the whole family, or for group parties, especially on special occasions and get-togethers. And they are also good for getting outdoors for the day. So getting back to our interview, what was production like at this paper mill?
Okay, this paper mill, out of those 7 mills I told you were in this paper alley, it was the smallest of all. But it had a nice mansard roof to it, which made it had a very unique look. It was not wide and small volume, but had a grand look. It was crowned off by that mansard. Maybe that's why they call it the crown paper that they sold. Now, the building was very different from the other giant paper mills around Holyoke, very different from the Nonotuck and Albion around it. And the reason why it was so small, that instead of going by floors in production, they would go by segment of the building, and the paper would go from one segment to the next segment. And that was their way of doing it. Okay, so for instance, a lot of the administration and repair shops and finishing was done in the front, and the actual engine room where the power was being generated was towards the back more. Okay, and what they did along the way is typical things for a paper mill. They beat the fibers up. They would drain it out. They would bleach the paper. They would then calendar it and let it dry, and then they would bring it to the cutting room where they would cut it down to the shape they need. And so lots of jobs were being done. Now towards the back, you had, instead of just one floor, you had sections of 2 floors, and one section, the highest part of the mill, was 3 floors. And that's the only part of the mill that had different floors doing different jobs. And that was the start of production, actually. And the rag room, for instance, was on the 3rd floor, and they bring it down and they would cart it there, get rid of the little knots, and then the beaters down below. So if there was any production style, it was in the very back, was high up, and then as the mill got lower, they would go from a segment of the mill to the next segment to do the next job. Okay, so it was quite different from a lot of the other mills.
And tell us about William Sims.
All right, so William Sims was the first co-owner of the Sims and Dudley Mill, and I told you he went off to Michigan, and he ended up getting hurt there in the paper mill, and then he left that paper mill, and he went to New Jersey and started a new one up, and then he moved to Connecticut to live with his son because he kept getting sicker and sicker, and it was all because of that fall had restricted his motions. And then in Connecticut, he ended up dying. Now in Holyoke, he had gotten rich pretty quickly. Remember, he was just an employee in a mill somewhere, And in 1880, he had enough money to get going his own mill. And by 1890, he was rich enough to buy or make a very ornate house. And that was on Linden Street. It's a Queen Anne Victorian home. It's still there. It was part of a presentation I gave last year where we talked about how the house was made and who had lived there through the years. And he was one of just two paper mill owners that lived there. William White and his son also lived in the house. So it's a very interesting history, and I hope you read about that house.
So thank you, Robert, on educating us on your chores, and we want to thank our listeners again for tuning in. And you can tune into a large selection of our other podcasts and much more at his website. Again, it's holyokecanaltour.org. And you can email him directly for more information or to sign up for private tours at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com.